Now, being a writer, I have a moment to breathe and really deeply reflect on who I am, what I want, what I've been through. There was times when I was writing the book and I was working with an editor, and she would highlight parts and just say, "Go further, go deeper. What are you really trying to say?" And I realized that as a teacher, I was skimming the surface on a lot of things. And now taking a step away has allowed me to really get into it. And so being a writer, even though I said a few minutes ago, most are drawn, not most,
Yeah.
they have problems. For me, it's been one of the more healthiest decisions I've made.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me today is one of my longest online friends, a wonderful writer, the inventor of the Mary question, my good friend, Jay Armstrong. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jesse. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro. It's always great to be here and talk with you about Bruce and life. And I'm really excited to be here and catch up with you.
Well, good. Well, let's start out with, in case someone has never listened to the 4 or 5 times you've been on the show before, tell us a little about yourself.
All right. Well, um, where do I begin? I was so how you and I met. I was an English teacher at the time, high school English, and I wrote a piece about um Bruce. I think it was about like Born to Run, maybe maybe it was Thunder Road. I can't remember. It was long ago. Anyway, you read it, contacted me, and then that started a relationship. And I explained to you in our first meeting that I had always taught Bruce in my class as a poet and as poetry. And so over the years, we shared this interest in Bruce. And then I got sick. I have it's called diffuse cerebellar atrophy. So essentially, what is I have a hole in my brain that is getting bigger by the years, and it's affecting speech and it's affecting motor skills. It's affecting my cognitive ability. So what I did was being diagnosed in 2013. I retired from teaching as of 2001, and I focused all my energies on my family, but also being a writer. Being a writer has always been a lifelong dream of mine. And so I like to think that I channeled a little bit of the spirit of Bruce and, not quit, but retired from my job and followed my dream of being a writer. And so here I am at the end of 2001 with a book coming out relatively soon. And I'm a dad. I'm a retired teacher, a dad, a husband, and now a writer.
Yeah, we're going to get to your new book, and I'm so excited about it and ordering it. Um, you know, 2021 has been a rough year for all of us. I think a lot of us thought that after 2020, it can't get much worse. And then you're like,
Mhm.
holy crap, look
Yeah.
at,
Yeah.
so yeah, Jay, if you guys have not known, I mean, he and I have had on, we've talked about underrated songs, best geography songs with Bruce. We've talked the Mary question multiple times.
Yeah.
And you get a shout out every episode.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
every episode I go, well, the Mary question came from Jay Armstrong, who is
you.
an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area, recently retired. And so that just, and it's funny because I can't figure out, Jay, when I started asking that question, because I know it wasn't to begin with, but after our discussions, and now it's kind of been one of the signature questions. And it
Right.
was really funny because a couple months ago, I had someone who wasn't a Bruce fan replied back like, does it have to be a Bruce song? And I'm like, yes, this is my shtick. Okay. Just listen to Thunder Road,
Yeah.
read the lyrics, and then just, there is no correct answer. There are right answers, and and we've
Yeah.
discussed that it has led to some very interesting questions and comments and conversations. And that's, I love that you gave me that. Um, I follow your blog, and I know you just did your first video blog, and you talked about that. Um, one of your frustrations is that your writing voice is stronger than ever. You feel like you're really hitting it on all cylinders, but it's frustrating because your speaking voice is weaker. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. It definitely is probably the most frustrating thing. Um, you know, I have always wanted to be a writer. And I have these silly fantasies of, standing in front of hundreds of people and talking about my book and doing autographs. I mean, like a kid who dreams of making in the NBA, like playing in game 7, and I dreamed of that. And
Yeah.
I dreamed of that for as long as I can remember. Now, as a kid, I didn't know any writers. I mean, every writer I knew was from my English teacher, and most of those writers were like, dead white guys who had
Yes.
a drinking problem,
Right.
and that's not and so I was like, well, and they were from like New York or London, and I'm from like the suburbs. So the idea of being a writer, just it was one of those things that I stored in the back of my brain. And as I was growing up, I was always working on it, but I wasn't really talking about it, or I wasn't doing enough about it. And then when I got sick, and that was like the kick in the butt that I needed. I'm like, I got to get this stuff out right now. And so there became this urgency of time to do this thing right now. And I think that gave me inspiration to become a better writer. And so I'm at this crossroads where my writing has never been stronger. But I mean, I've been writing for years. It is taking a long time to get to this point. And I'm really proud of my writing, but I'm not proud of my voice. And so my physical voice. And so speaking is challenging. Handwriting is becoming very difficult. And this kind of keeps in, but I had this fantasy of like having a table there and signing books, and it's something I want to do. But right now I physically can't handle that. So that caused a lot of frustration and what I've learned through this is that life is never going to be perfect. There's never going to be the perfect opportunity, the perfect setup. Something is always going to be challenged. Something is always going to be wrong. And so, what I believe I have to do, and maybe somebody else who's in a similar spot, is no matter what, you just have to keep working toward that dream, toward that goal that you have.
Yeah, one of the things that made me smile, and by the way, just to give you guys, pull the curtain back a little bit, Jay and I talked about it, and I said, do you want to do this live? Do you want to, because I told him in the past, I've had people who English is a second language. I've sent the questions in advance, let them record it. You said, no, with you, I want to be live, and we're going to do the best we can. So please don't think we're making Jay like, hey, get him. But one of the things I love, and this is kind of combining a couple of questions, but you wrote on your blog, your I believe it was your son being asked, what does daddy do? And and there's this whole, he doesn't do anything, and you're like, no, son, and you ended up, after a really funny and heartfelt essay, you kind of said, yeah, I'm a writer. You can tell people dad's a writer.
Right.
I I think I've shared this with you, and I know my listeners know, my wife was diagnosed 4 or 5 years ago with basically a brain injury. I tell the story kind of to explain and to be a little funny, is she just was starting to forget things. She couldn't put sentences together. She would not be able to find her car in the parking lot. And it's right there. Just she couldn't recognize it. And so she kept going. And finally, there wasn't a diagnosis, which similar to you, because I remember the story, like for the longest time, people couldn't figure out what's wrong. And she came to her physical therapy with shorts on, and she had all kinds of scars on her knees. And the therapist said, man, what's that? And Linda says, I fall from my bike all the time. And the therapist said, well, do you ever land on your head? And Linda said, well, only twice where I broke my bike helmet. The other times when I fell, it didn't hit at all. And the therapist like, holy crap. And sure enough, that this was similar to what football players hit with multiple concussions. So Linda has good days and bad days where, she's sharp, she's enjoying, she's doing things, but other days she just is so mentally tired from having to fight to keep everything going. She'll spend a couple of days just on the couch watching mindless TV. And I just like, hey, Lindy, that's as much as like physically you have to rest, mentally is just as strong of an illness, and you've got to rest that too. So how are you coping with not teaching and fighting your illness? Because you've been very honest, there is no cure. This is just something you will live with the rest of your life. So share me a little bit about that.
I taught for almost 20 years, and being a teacher was who I was. It was who I identified myself as. And I knew at the end of 2020, it was time to move on. I just knew that. I knew that in my heart, my gut. I knew it was time. And I think it was a combination of my illness plus the year that was 2020. Like I knew I had to do something else. And so I retired from teaching, and it's funny. I wrestled with this question of, do you miss it? Is it hard not being a teacher anymore? And I think the correct thing to say would be, yeah, I miss it.
Yeah.
But below that, Jess, between you and I don't miss it. I mean, I was grateful. I am grateful for
Yeah.
everything that it gave me, for the relationships that I built, for the things I learned and how I developed as a person. I am so grateful. I would not be the writer I am today if I hadn't taught, because what I was doing teaching, I was learning the craft myself. So I am forever in debt to being a teacher. Do I miss it? No. Because that was then, and this is now. This is who I am. This I don't identify myself as a teacher anymore. It's like I shedded that skin and I moved on. And so I think moving on was the best thing for me, because your question was, how do I handle this? Well, if I was a teacher and my health was declining the way it was, I would be in a really bad place,
Sure.
because teaching is very stressful, and you're not just dealing with your own stuff. You're dealing with your own stuff, but then you have 100 other students, and then you have the demands of being an employee. So I would have self-destructed, and I
Sure.
know that. I just know it, I would. So now, being a writer, I have a moment to breathe and really deeply reflect on who I am, what I want, what I've been through. There was times when I was writing the book, and I was working with an editor, and she would highlight parts and just say, "Go further, go deeper. What are you really trying to say?" And I realized that as a teacher, I was skimming the surface on a lot of things. And now taking a step away has allowed me to really get into it. And so being a writer, even though I said a few minutes ago, most are drawn, not most,
Yeah.
they have problems. But for me, it's been one of the more healthiest decisions I've made. And so writing for me, the blog, the book, it's it's all a form of therapy. It really is. It gives me a chance to not only talk with other people like yourself, but to really explore who I am, and my struggles, and how do I best deal with what I have to deal with.
A couple things. One, I the first part is, as you're telling this story, I'm thinking of Springsteen's Better Days, right? And which has always been on my list of top
Yeah.
two songs probably. And the idea, right, is to enjoy the journey, to not focus on the past, not focus on what's coming on, but focus where you are right now. And I think that's exactly what you're doing. You enjoyed your time as a teacher. There are, from your blog and from stories you and I have talked about, there is a joy to a former student coming up to you at a grocery store or at a graduation and going, Mr. Armstrong, I'm still reading blank, or I found a new writer and author and I'm discussing, and you were able to explore poetry and literature. And I tell my people that when we're talking about doing something for employee appreciation or a MAL committee, I go, a third of people are going to love it, a third of people hated it, and a third of the people just don't care. And I would think as a teacher, no matter what subject you're covering, right, whether it's a short story, you're reading a novel, you're reading poetry, a third will love it, a third will hate it, and a third just won't care. And the idea is you rotate enough different items that at least sometime during the year, everyone had at least one point where they go, oh, I really love that.
Yeah.
The other
And
thing is I can remember when I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, Mrs. Duhan, who was my homeroom teacher and an English teacher, um, talked about all the flaws of writers, like talked about being drug addicts, being, drunkards, as she called it. And,
right.
and I was, I was struck by these are flawed men or women that were fighting their own demons. And it made me feel better, like, well, I have my own demons and I can figure out. So I'm going to move over. So, first off, when is the book out and what's the title?
So, Bedtime Stories for the Living will be out December 3rd, 2001.
Bedtime for grown up? Bedtime stories for grown up?
Stories
Yeah, I love that.
for the living.
But okay, perfect. All right, now you shared with me a little piece, and I'm going to read this, and then I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Do I love my children? On most days, I do. On most days, like you, they're decent people. So why didn't I tell them bedtime stories? Selfishly, I don't like the pressure, the highlight, the slow swirl of the ceiling fan blades, their big eyes staring up at me, expecting me to entertain them, to stir their imagination. Who do they think I am? Bruce Springsteen? No, I'm a dad who gets his sushi from a supermarket. I wear sneakers with khaki pants. I once taught high school English in New Jersey. I mean, to be creative and tell a story on demand is right down stressful. Who needs that kind of stress after 9 p.m.? First off, as a dad who loved to read, I was not good at reading to my son, partly because I can read silently faster than I can out loud. And I was like, this is too slow for me. And the other thing is, he was not someone who, was a strong audience. He was like, yeah, whatever. So we just didn't do that a lot.
Right.
I love that introduction. So talk to me a little bit about why you decided that, and how did you come up with this premise for the book?
So, I, years ago, I was thinking about writing a book, and I thought about what I want to write, what I want to say, and being sick, there was a sense of urgency there, and I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to be honest and truthful and nonfiction. I wanted to lay everything out. Like, this is it. This is who I am. And I as a reader, I've always found that fascinating. Um, somebody like Springsteen on Broadway. I mean, that story, that whole production is very raw and honest and real. And I got a lot of inspiration from not just Springsteen on Broadway, but books and movies and documentaries like that, where this is who I am for better or worse. So I wanted to write a book like that was very honest and real. Um, and I think being sick, getting sick, was sort of catalyst for that. This is who I am, for better or worse, take it or leave it. And so as I was thinking about that premise, I started thinking about who would I want to write to? Who more than anybody else would I want to write to? And it's not to demean anybody else, but I have three children that I
Right.
adore, and my fear is that I'm gonna go before I have a chance to tell them what I really want to say.
Wow.
And so that premise started gaining momentum. And what would I really want to tell them if something happens and I'm not here? I and I'm sure you've been there too. People that you love have passed,
Yes.
and they have lived a great life, and you're incredibly sad for them to pass. But sometimes they leave you with just memories, and that is all. And you have to make sense of that. And my my wife's grandfather, he passed during the writing of this book, and um I loved him. I mean, there's a chapter in the book dedicated to him. He taught me how to golf, and I wrote a story of that. Um, and he lived a good life. He was in his 90s when he died, but what he left behind was he left behind woodwork. He was very good at building coffee tables and end tables and curio cabinets. And so now in my house right now, we have um we have work that he touched. We have his coffee table, we have his end tables, and I stare at them. I kind of want those things to speak, and I know they can't. And so I am not a woodworker. I am not good at that. So I thought about, what am I good at? What would I leave my children with? And it would be stories. It would be a book. So this book is them. And that's how the book really started coming together. Like, what could I leave my children? It wouldn't be woodwork. It would be stories. And as a father, I'm flawed. Jess, I think there is something interesting about the flaws of people. Um, not that we dissect the flaw, but I think you learn a lot about a person through their flaws.
Yes.
And so I I was thinking about, as a dad, I have flaws. And one of those flaws is that I am a writer, I am a storyteller, and yet I never told my kids a bedtime story. I just never have. And that was like a punch in the gut. I'm like, man, now they're too old. Like, I should have started this years ago, and I never did. So I missed my chance. So much the book is about seizing the moment and taking life head on and appreciating the time that you have, and not missing the moments that you're gonna miss, but open your eyes and ears to the sound of life, so when that moment comes, you can react.
You know, what first comes to mind is there was a line, and I can't remember the song title, but Hank Williams Jr. in one of his songs talks about he he regrets that his dad never sang him to sleep. Right. So here's Hank Williams Jr. talking about his father, Hank Williams Sr., a icon of country music, right? Like,
Right.
obviously you could make the argument one of the best of all time songwriters and musicians, and he never sang him to sleep.
Yeah.
You wonder, did Bruce sing the kids to sleep? Did Bruce, when they were younger, tell stories, right? Like, um, go
You
ahead.
know, there. It's funny you bring that up, because there is a part in his book where it's in the Born in the USA section or chapter,
Yeah.
where he talks about he was on tour for like a year, a stadium tour. Every night he was in front of like 70,000 people, and then that tour ended, and he got home, and his children were younger at that time, and he says they didn't care. They didn't care who I was, what I did on that. They just wanted a dad. And that struck me. I'm not a rock star, but for almost 20 years, I gave a lot of my heart and soul and energy into students and into
Yeah.
my work. And there are plus and minuses. Unfortunately, by doing that, I ignored some of my children to a point. I just assumed they would always be little. As
Right.
silly as that sounds, I think we kind of fall that way sometimes. There will
Yeah.
always be time. And then for me, I learned the hard way. There is not going to be time. And so what are you going to do about
Yeah. I think back, and I do need to share with you. You make my son and I smile. Um, in a couple of your blogs, you'll talk about that your son is excited that it's game day, right? The Eagles are going to be playing,
it?
and you guys are excited and you are ready to watch together. And whether you're, wearing an Eagles t-shirt or a jersey or just a cap or whatever it is, and my son is 32 and he still comes over, you know, every Sunday, usually on Friday night, makes it a weekend. And he has a cowboy banner he puts up. He has, God forbid if you're not drinking coffee from a cowboy mug on Sunday morning, and and he, as much as he, as a great sports fan, damn Eagles, hearing you talk about and your son excitement brings great smiles to his face, right? That just the idea, because I've shared this many times, Jay, but especially during his teenage years, he would be gone all the time. But Friday Night Lights, Veronica Mars, Cowboy game, he would always be home to watch together as a family.
Right.
And so that bonding that you will have always with that, and now then that he's gone to a couple of Springsteen shows, he's like ready, like, okay, I'm ready to go. When's he gonna tour, Dad? We got to go see him again. So that's beautiful. How different is writing a blog compared to writing a book? Are you using different muscles, or is it similar because they're both nonfiction?
Great question. So with a blog or with an essay, it's short. It's like a sprint, um, 500 words, 1,000 words. Oftentimes when I write shorter pieces, I start with the end. I know how it's going to end. And a lot of times with shorter pieces, I work backwards. I mean, I just know how I want to end it, and then I work to the front. And um, I've been writing for a while now, where I can see a short piece. Um, I can imagine, I can see it before I write it. There's, things come in and out of the pieces I write it, but it's a sprint. I can see the finish line before I begin, and I just go at it, and writing short pieces. When I know what I want to write about, writing it doesn't take long. It's the refining, it's the editing that takes a little while. But I can see the whole thing before I begin. Now, with a book, I mean, my book is just short of 50,000 words. So you can't see the end. It's like a marathon. You
Yeah.
have to like writing a book is like starting the finish line and say, okay, I'm going to run to that lamppost. Then I'm going to get that lamppost. I'm going to run to the next one and the next one. So as I was working the book, it was kind of frustrating because I I didn't know how I wanted to end until I got to the end.
Yeah. Do you have any interest or any itch to write fiction?
Um, you know, I I do and I don't.
Okay.
Um, I read a lot of fiction.
Yeah.
I do. I love fiction, but I don't see myself as a fiction writer right now. I mean, that could change. It totally could. But I think that I'm writing right now from place of me,
Yeah.
and it's who I am, and it's everything that I want to say as a human right now. Now, maybe that will change. Maybe as you know, I do plan to write more. It's funny that you brought up my son thinking that I don't do anything.
Yeah.
Because the running joke in my house is that I'm a home dad. That's what
Right.
they call me. I'm a home dad.
Right.
Um, and so I've already been like identifying that as my next adventure. Now, do I write that as fiction? Maybe that's been the idea. Do I write the adventures of Home Dad as a fictional story? It's a possibility.
Sure, because the idea, right, you could take the basis of facts and embellish it enough
Yeah,
to add it for funny,
yeah,
and drama. That would
yeah.
be good. The how I kind of talked to you a little bit about this, but you have been on a journey of self-discovery, I think, from the moment was when you discovered something was wrong, a journey till you got a diagnosis. Then, in a lot of ways, you've gone through the 5 stages of grief,
Yeah.
but like, anger, bargaining, acceptance. So I know you probably, this is your whole life has been a self-discovery, but specifically as you wrote the book, did you learn a little bit about yourself? And if
I
so, what was it?
yeah, I learned a lot. Um, so much of me, writing a book was me reflecting on who I was and who I am now and where I want to go as a husband and as a father. Um, and so much of the book is dealing with disappointment and that's going to happen, that we we're going to fail, and we have to get used to it. I think the thing that I learned about myself, that sort of surprised me, was that I developed a perseverance, to just keep going and not quit. Um, and there have been many of things that I have quit. In fact, I think about as a writer. I mean, I started my first book in secret, probably when I was 18. Um, and then I wrote, for about a week, and then I stopped. And I think about, there was like a 20-year period where I would write and then stop, write and then stop. And I over I again I think it was the illness, the urgency of time, that I wasn't gonna get back any time that I had to do this right now. So what I learned about myself was um I'm tougher than I thought I was. And I'm not trying to brag. But what I have is not for the faint of heart. Um I mean, I can tell you how many times I have fallen in the past month. Here's two. I fell down a flight of steps and broke through drywall. That's one. Second time, I fell through a hanging mirror door and crashed through that mirror door and shattered that mirror door. And fortunately, I'm okay. But
Yeah.
what I have is not for the faint of heart. And um as a writer, I just learned to just keep going, just keep doing this thing. That's it. I learned that I got some perseverance. Now, when it comes to writing, I can persevere. Other things I quit just like anybody else.
You're sitting there and I'm thinking, right, well, it ain't no secret. I've been around a time or two. Well, I don't know, baby. Maybe you've been around too. Where there's another dance and all you got to do is say yes. And if you're rough and ready for love, honey, I'm tougher than the rest.
Yeah.
You know, as many great Springsteen songs, that could be a love song. I know that I have had, there's been young people talk about, um, I saw someone who was in a wheelchair fighting some childhood disease, talked about Tougher Than the Rest was his favorite song. And then, so I think similar, The Rising can be about, New Orleans. It could be about 9/11. It could be about the Jersey Shore. It I do think that finding out that you are tougher than you thought you were, tougher than the rest, is
Yeah.
something to be strong with. I don't want to keep you too long. I don't want to tire you out too much,
No.
but what's the best way to find the book?
So the book will be available on December 3rd on Amazon,
Okay.
and then it will be on Ingram Spark. It will also be available in bookstores, libraries. So the easiest way to find it right now, December 3rd, is on Amazon.
Okay. And I have, is it, because I have not been able to see the link yet in Amazon. Is it not available for pre-order yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're recording this and we're 29 days away
Okay.
from December 3rd. And there are like I can smell the finish line.
Yeah.
I am almost there. I mean,
Yeah.
I have like a big toe on the line right now. So this morning it's funny how things work out, but my book designer is she lives in Australia. So we have a 14-hour difference of time. So, when she's awake, I'm sleeping and vice versa. So it kind of, she's great and she's done wonderful things, but time was it's a little challenging. So I woke up this morning with a message from her, and there were a few things I needed to do before we got uploaded. And I did that, and then I messaged her, but she's sleeping, so
Yeah.
I won't hear back from her for like another 12 hours.
Yeah.
But it will be uploaded soon. Yes.
I love the cover. I love the image. I think it's beautiful. I think, and what a great title, Bedtime Stories for the Living. I really appreciate it and exciting. If you're still feeling good, I got to know what you think about, we really haven't talked about in depth Western Stars or Letter to You. So I'll take your riding hat cap on and put your
Sure.
Bruce fan on. As a music fan and as a writer, what are your thoughts on those two albums?
Um, I thought they were both great. They were both excellent albums. Western Stars. I love the fact that Bruce does not quit on trying to figure out who he is.
Yeah.
Even now, um, I made a playlist for my book, and the second song was growing up, and that song, I mean, I played it. So I made a playlist that I just play over and over and over again while I'm working on the book. And
Do you have
growing
that on,
up,
do you have that on Spotify?
yes, it's on
If
Spotify.
if you want to share that link, I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
So song number 2 is Growing Up. And it's so funny to hear a young Bruce in that song. Like that's kind of like his mission statement. I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna figure out who I am. And now we have Bruce who how old is he now, Jeff?
72, I think. Yeah.
72. Yeah.
Don't yell at us if we get it wrong, audience, please. But yes.
And he put out Western Stars as, I mean, what I think was he took a very different approach. I mean, at this point in his career and his life, Bruce can hang up his hat and call it a day, but he just keeps going. And that's what, the spirit of Bruce is so much in me and in this book. I mean, I use him as a source of inspiration to just keep going, and that's what that album is. Him just taking on a different persona, going out west and saying, "Okay, who am I?" And it's comforting that a guy who has everything that he wants is still trying to figure himself out.
I've said this multiple times that Western Stars felt to me like an audio version of a collection of Leonard Elmore short stories, right? Like that feeling. And it really is similar to like Nebraska, in a lot of ways, some of his most literary work. Letter to You, someone was on Facebook was saying that after about a year, the album just didn't do it for them. Like they said, I appreciate it, but it just doesn't speak to me the way that some of his earlier work does. And I answered, I said, I understand and respect that opinion, but when you think about the crap storm that was 2020, and to have that talk about at the finish line, all of a sudden, holy moly, we have a new Bruce album. Oh, it's the E Street Band. Oh, there's a documentary. Oh, he's doing press where he's sharing some of his most intimate and, personal stories. Oh, maybe 2020 is not the worst year ever. And then we got a presidential election, which made me smile. So Letter to You will always be a special place in my heart, the same way like The Rising, because that was the first album that really got me passionate about Bruce. I went from a casual fan to a major fan after I saw him live. So what were your thoughts on Letter to You?
The first time I heard it, I was in my car and I was driving and I started with the first track, which is 1 Minute You're Here. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was 2020, everything was going on. I was writing the book.
Yeah.
And I read that, and it was like everything collided for a moment. And that track, I must have listened to it over, I just kept replaying it over and over again. Not that it's my favorite Bruce song. It's not. It's not my favorite. But you know, the honesty of that song and the vulnerability. And after, I mean, like, you have Bruce on like Born in USA, who he's vulnerable, yeah, but he has like there's a toughness to him, um in growing up, there's this idea that I'm going to be a rock star and I'm going to be immortal. And he's not as braggadocious as that, but he has that sort of edge to him. And I think rock stars do. When you hit that level, there is a feeling of invulnerability and I'm going to live forever. And that moment right there, that first track, I mean, after everything he's been through, he took a moment and he just said, 1 minute you're here. And that was, we're all there. No matter who, it's Bruce, me, you, we're all there. I mean, that's life. It ends. And for him to be at that point in his life, that was, and to say those words, it put a lot of life into perspective.
You know, it made me think of one of my favorite little sequences in Neil Gaiman had the kind of set in the Sandman universe, the Death miniseries, and there's a poignant scene. And if you guys are not aware, Death in this world is like she looks like a teenage goth girl, and there is she goes and there's a baby who had died, and the baby looks at her and says, "Is that it?" And Death says, "You got what everyone else gets, a lifetime." And
Yeah.
So poignant. And and I think that's what Bruce is saying. And I had someone who does a grief podcast join me earlier this year, Callista, and I told her, I said, you should listen to Letter to You. She wasn't a Springsteen fan, and she came back after. She goes, "Oh my goodness, this album is all about grief." Can I come back on and talk about it?
Yeah.
It is about grief, but it's also about healing, and it's not a morbid album. In fact, it truly is, the cliche, right? Like a funeral is a celebration of life, right? I think this album is a celebration of, I'm the last man standing. We're still here. We're still making music. We are missing those that are gone, but we are celebrating the fact that we're still here and we're still loving each other and being creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a part in my book. My book's broken up into 5 parts.
Okay.
And part 4 is about death. And in fact, early on, part 4 was identified as death. And I was like, man, I gotta soften that a little bit,
Yeah.
So now part 4 is, I'm not sleeping, I'm just resting my eyes. And that whole part is about death and
Yeah.
people who have died and telling stories about people who have died. And I'm paraphrasing, but Shakespeare said that every third thought should be about death. And as I've gotten older, on surface, that is really morbid. But as I've gotten older, I'm starting to realize that. And I think in my book, I don't want my children to fear death. I want them to understand that it's a natural part of life.
Yeah. Once again, it goes back to Bruce. I'll see you in my dreams where all the summers have come to an end. I'll see you in my dreams where we'll meet and live and love again. I'll see you in my dreams, yep, up around the river bend, for death is not the end, and I'll see you in my dreams. I think that's a very healthy, goal to share and to push. I cannot wait to read the book. I'm so excited. In the meantime, Jay, tell people how they can follow you on social media and how they can sign up for your mailing list, where about twice a week, I think, maybe.
Now, once a week.
It feels like a couple,
yeah. Sometimes I throw in an extra, but I've been writing now once a week for 5 years, and at first it was like you were shouting to a void, and nobody was hearing it, and there were times that I wanted to quit, but for whatever reason, I just kept doing it, and now we're I'm over 500 weekly readers on my mailing list, and I get a lot of feedback and a lot of messages. So it's fun, and now that I'm writing, this book is coming out, a lot of recent posts have been about the book, and what I like to do is kind of give a behind the scenes look at the book, and who I am.
Yeah.
So you can find me at rightonfighton.org. There's a link to the mailing list on the website. You can also find me on Facebook, same thing, Right on Fight On, and on Twitter as well.
Yeah, and I really urge you, if you've not already done it, go to rightonfighton.org, sign up for the mailing list. They are sometimes poignant, sometimes funny, always insightful and entertaining. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Jay, my friend, I am so excited about the book. I'm excited that your journey continues. Know that you're in my thoughts, you're in my prayers, and that I love you. And I'm hoping to have you on in January or February after I read the book, and we kind of do a more in-depth kind of post-game press conference, let's say, right? Like, that would be fun.
Definitely.
Yeah. Any final thoughts you want to share with the listeners?
As I've been going through this journey of writing of this book, there was a lot of doubt, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of I can't do this. And a lot of times in those moments of desperation, I look to my younger self. And what I mean by that is I have a picture in an album photo of myself as like a 3-year-old kid. And it's just me, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at the camera. And I got these big blue eyes and this like big like bowl haircut. And I often thought to myself, 41-year-old me, wants to make that kid proud. What do I have to do to make that kid proud? So it's amazing to me that somebody like Bruce was once a 4-year-old kid. We were all young little kids. We're all 4-year-olds at one time. Um, that idea of making my younger self proud got me through a lot of hard times. So I guess the last thing I want to say is if you're having a tough time, think about your younger self and what would they want you to do in this moment. And they would probably want you to keep going, to move forward, to find goodness in life.
Well said. Well said. I love that thought. Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the time. Um, we're recording this kind of the beginning of November, but I have a backlog of episodes. So this is probably published, we're probably only a week away from the publication. And by then it should be on Amazon. Look at the show notes. You'll find where to go to purchase it. And as I said, I just love you, brother. And so thank you so much for your time. Listeners, go get vaccinated. Go remember to be good to each other. Let's support each other. Let's make that younger version of ourselves proud of the person we became. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts, as well as a Merry Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.